This is the Fifth Estate Winning Headlines, your media police post. In this segment, we summarize some of the headlines that you may have missed this morning. We also take a look at the political pieces that we call cartoons in this country. Today is the 1st of October 2021, and I am AX.
I'm GW.
And I am GK. In case you missed the headlines, here they are. The Daily Nation, former IBC bosses at center of 2022 poll. The Standard, Gideon's grand entry into the race. The Star, RUTO allies laugh off Uhuru's nod for Raila. And for the People Daily, Mount Kenya mouths ODM leader as a 2022 candidate.
Ooh.
So, AX, what are you going to start us off with today?
Well, my thoughts today are inspired by The Star. It reports that RUTO and his allies are laughing off the developments of the week. Now, as we know, the Mount Kenya Foundation just stopped shy of endorsing Raila's candidacy. And then later this week, the president hinted at another endorsement. In short, Raila has had a very good week, and William Ruto knows it. This is why he is trying to dismiss what has happened. So today, I would like to discuss his dismissal strategy because, quite frankly, it's funny. So how does he respond to all that's happening in a way that projects strength, pacifies his base, and above all, buys him time? He denies. He denies, he denies, he denies. But what does denial look like? Sociologist Stanley Cohen identifies 3 types of denial: literal, implicative, and interpretive. Literal denial is the one we are all familiar with. It is the active dismissal and ignoring of facts, like saying the sky is purple when the sky is actually blue. Implicative denial is when you accept the facts and accept what they mean, but you reject the moral, political, and social implications of those facts, like claiming to earn 1.5 million shillings a day on chickens, but still calling yourself a hustler. Like, no. So today we'll focus on the 3rd type of denial, interpretive denial. Interpretive denial accepts the facts but rejects the meaning. And why do you do this? Because it protects your psyche. It protects you from having to accept that perhaps you are not as well liked as you may think. This is what Nixon did with Watergate. He denied his government's involvement to protect himself. And this, and this is what RUTO is doing right now. He has said that Raila can go ahead and meet with the tycoons. He will continue to meet with the people, with the hustlers, because after all, he is backed by the people. So it doesn't matter if Raila secured the endorsement of the Mount Kenya Foundation, because they were not the targets of RUTO's political seduction. Right? So what is RUTO doing here? He is denying the significance of what Raila has accomplished, accepting that it happened, but rejecting its meaning. The only question is whether or not this denial is effective. I argue it is not for 2 reasons. First, and as Keith Khan-Harris argues, to be in denial is to know. In essence, RUTO knows what happened is significant, but which is to say that he does not buy his own lies. And second, in the words of Otto von Bismarck, never believe anything in politics until it has officially been denied. So thank you, RUTO, for confirming what you intended to deny. You might want to wipe that egg off your face right here, right there. Yeah.
You know, when you spoke about the 3 types and you said literal denial, I think he's also very good at literal denial. I think you give him too much credit. He's not just
interpretive denier. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I think it's me next. And you know, this past week has set in motion the season of high politics and the build-up to the 2022 election. And no, it is not because Gideon Moi declared his intention to run for president. No. Instead, it is because the week's events seem to have exposed Raila's winning strategy. And in my view, Raila has adopted what is known as the counter-attack strategy.
Oh, do tell us.
Okay, so this strategy was developed in the 33 Strategies of War. That's a book by Robert Greene. While researching wars throughout history, Greene discovered an interesting fact. The side that was on the defensive often won the war. So in a nutshell, the strategy allows one party to let the enemy make the first move. Once the enemy has expended his energy, you launch your attack. This strategy gives the opponent the flexibility to attack the enemy from many different angles. And this is what I believe Raila has been doing over the past few months. It began with him openly mirroring Ruto's political moves to disarm him. And the next stage entails making gains in Ruto's strongholds while Ruto is drained.
Yes.
Consider that Raila began his campaign for the Gema Heart at SK Masharia's house alone. His support grew to 3 in influentials in Nyanyuki, then 8 in Githurai, and by the time he gathered leaders at Safari Park, his support had grown to 13 strong. Now this week, he was greeted by over 30 Mount Kenya MPs. RUTO must be shaking in his boots. Raila is demonstrating slow but steady growth. His Mount Kenya tour has been a huge success. The owners of things in the mountain have given him audience, and Uhuru Kenyatta was just a few words shy of giving Baba his endorsement. Raila has answered the Gema question. He patiently waited for RUTO to make his moves and now is unleashing his fully loaded arsenal.
Wow. Well, I think that I should actually touch on what happened with Gideon's launch.
If you must.
It says the headline in the Standard.
Okay.
And it says Gideon's launch, or Gideon's grand entry into the race. Now, one might ask, what is the point of Gideon declaring his bid in a 2-horse race?
Yeah.
What is at stake for Gideon Moi?
I'm wondering.
Isn't it curious that on the launch of Gideon Moi's presidential campaign, Raila was there along with OK Alliance in front and center, holding hands, supporting this man Moi. How does this all add up? What does Raila hope to possibly gain by attending this launch? Is it optics? If it is about optics, then we can expect the same handheld parade at each of the presidential launches. But if we're to be practical here, the Tugen vote that Gideon Moi can possibly rally is only 150,000 votes. But we shouldn't underestimate him still. The historical ties that stand behind Gideon Moi are bigger than 150 votes. The history of Kanu is the history of our nation. Today, we'd like to hypothesize that this is all a calculated move to elicit a runoff scenario.
Okay.
Once the runoff happens, the odds of Raila winning the election increase significantly.
Indeed.
And once Baba Man is in office, the OK Alliance will have achieved the end goal. They will have crafted a government of national unity 2.0 with their real positions guaranteed in the winning coalition. They are playing the long game. And if we're being honest, Gideon is better off hanging onto the coattails of Baba Man than doing nothing at all in this coming election. Where are we going with this? Instead of trying to dominate RUTO's every move, Gideon has worked to define the nature of his political relationships. This is what he's done with Oka and Raila. Gideon Moi has altered his terrain and set a pace that best suits him. He's working for the interests of his associates, not against them.
Okay.
In order for him to survive this game, he must play along to this long game. And to add to it, during the launch, Baba reiterated this, that Gideon is the one who was handed Mzee Moi's fimbo. A powerful message was being sent there. And I quote, "Simama imara, wewe ni wewe." End quote. He cannot waste this moment.
Wow, wow. You drew out a lot out of the Standard.
You really did.
Anyways, we have a 3-part criteria that we use to judge the headlines for you. We ask ourselves these 3 questions. Is the headline topical or speculative? Is it repetitive or groundbreaking? And is it thoughtful or just plain lazy? So I'll read again the headlines for you. A Daily Nation, former IABC bosses at center of 2022 poll. The Standard, Gideon's grand entry into the race. The Star, RUTO allies laugh off Uhuru's nod for Raila. And the People Daily, Mount Kenya mulls ODM leader as 2022 candidate. So what do you guys think about the headlines today?
Oh, wow. To be honest, none of them have been particularly inspiring to me today. Considering that it is a Friday, I feel like they failed to capture the weekend spirit that we've all come to expect for this day. And they're not necessarily, with the exception of the Standard, not topical, but the Standard, again, is very basic, very boring. So
GW. Any vote for the Standard, GW?
None at all. Actually, none for all of them. Yeah, let's just keep it frank.
Okay, so my vote doesn't count. There is no winning headline.
And now, on to a final thought. It is inspired by a 4-hole favorite, It is called The Dictator's Handbook.
But before we get into the book, let me give you guys a summary of what we've been talking about this week. We have been looking at dictators. On Tuesday, we looked at the man himself, Lord of the Seas and the People, and that whole line, Idi Amin. The story of, and the book was Idi Amin, the story of Africa's icon of evil by Mark Leopold. In this powerful and provocative account, Leopold places Amin's military background and close relationship with the British state at the heart of the story. He reveals how Amin was from birth deeply rooted in the history of British colonial rule, and how his rise was a legacy of imperialism, and how his monstrous image was created. Then we moved on Wednesday and we looked at the dictator's shadow, Life Under Augusto Pinochet by Geraldo Munoz. Pinochet was the most important third world dictator of the Cold War and perhaps the most ruthless. Pinochet's American backers saw his regime as a bulwark against communism. His nation was a testing ground for US-inspired economic theories, but the question raised by Pinochet's rule still remains. Are such dictators somehow necessary? And yesterday, on Thursday, we looked at Belarus, the last European dictatorship by Andrew Wilson. And for all of those of you who do not know, the last European dictator is Alexander Lukashenko. This book is the first in English to explore both Belarus's complicated road to nationhood. Wilson's focus puts particular attention on Alexander Lukashenko's surprising longevity as president, despite human rights abuses and involvement in yet another rigged election in December of 2010. And as GW said, today we are looking at the Dictator's Handbook. Now, AX, you can take us through.
Yes, as GK wonderfully summarized, this week we have been looking at dictators across the world. And from Amin to Lukashenko, Romanov to Pinochet, it seems like they're all playing from the exact same playbook. And not just political dictators either, but every shade of dictator, from CEOs to brides. They all seem to know how to hold on to power and all use the exact same rules to do it. And in today's book, we learn just what these rules are. Today, we are revisiting a Fort Hall favorite, The Dictator's Handbook, Why Bad Behavior is Almost Always Good Politics, by Bruce Bueno de Mesquita and Alistair Smith. Mesquita and Smith start from a single assertion. Leaders want power and will do whatever it takes to keep them in power. And I quote, politicians are all the same, they write, and anyone who thinks that their leaders do what they ought to and what's best for the nation of their subjects ought to become an academic rather than enter political life, end quote. This means that politicians don't care about national interest or even their subjects unless they have to. For example, South Africa's F.W. de Klerk cut a deal with Nelson Mandela because his apartheid government ran out of money, not because he wanted to do with the awful status quo. And in Kenya, Moi only agreed to multi-party democracy in order to keep the foreign aid money flowing in, not because he saw the light. And this rule applies to every leader, whether they are a Democrat, a monarch, a dictator, or your student union president. And to hold on to power, leaders must follow 3 rules. 1, depend on a few supporters and spoil them. Mesquita and Smith argue that, and I quote, paying supporters, not good governance or representing the general will, is the essence of ruling. Second, you must remind your supporters that they are very easily replaceable. And third, greed is good, but do not let your greed destroy the economy and provide the grounds for a revolution. This is how you hold on to power in almost every area of life, from the boardroom to the classroom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Dictator's Handbook.
All right, let me ask you a question. What is the best way to understand political power?
Okay.
And do we, the loyal citizens and the voters of this world, know how to maintain and control our elected leaders?
Okay.
Or are we just merely pawns in their political games and rivalries? To understand this book, we must understand how supporters fall into 3 groups. 1, the essentials. These are the people whose support is absolutely necessary for a person to come to power, the Watus. 2, the influentials. These are the people who, though are important to every leader to gain power, aren't always the people who determine whether the leader stays in power. And 3, the nominals. These are the people who have some influence over who is in charge, but aren't necessary for a leader to obtain that power. It is through these 3 groups that leaders interact with the electorate. The size of these groups can be the difference between a stable democracy like New Zealand and an oppressed state like Afghanistan. The way our leaders control each of these groups is what determines the overall well-being of the nation.
Okay.
Allow yourself to look beyond the perspective of the voter and focus on the perspective of our leaders. What do our leaders focus on? The next time you look at your leader, ask yourself, how did you get there? Leaders, more often than not, do whatever is necessary to rise to power.
Indeed.
At the same time, they're constantly surrounded by rivals ready to cut them down to size and take their place if they fail to provide for their coalition. What becomes clear is that if you can change the winning coalition, then you can change their world. Now, one main observation guides the writers, and it is this: no man rules alone. The authors explain that the logic of politics is not complex. It is as simple as adjusting our thinking around it. More specifically, that we must stop thinking that our elected leaders have the ability to lead unilaterally. No leader whatsoever can govern alone. The power of any leader today is constrained by the need to implement and maintain public policies that solidify the winning coalition. When the coalition is large and widely represented, then public policy is focused on public good. But if the coalition is small, then loyalty of that small circle can easily be corrupted and paid off with bribes and tokens of appreciation. A tender or two here, an investment opportunity in Uganda there. I mean, the reality is almost always at the expense of the larger tax-paying public, the WATUs. Okay, listen. This shows us that a small coalition leads to corrupt regimes that can easily be manipulated. When honorable people and their motives get overwhelmed by the need to keep supporters happy. All political life revolves around this maxim. Expand all these fields and everything changes for the better for the vast majority of people. With that, you'll have liberated the populace, that they're ready to work harder for their own behalf and better educated, healthier, wealthier, and free.
Wow. You know, the book, The Dictator's Handbook, as we've said, is a fifth estate classic for a reason. Throughout the book, the authors break apart the way we often think of politics, only to rebuild a more cynical understanding of the craft. I, for one, was fascinated by all the rules that the authors outlined throughout the book. And so today, allow me to focus on one set of rules that I found to be extremely interesting and that GW touched on a little. These rules are from the chapter called Shuffling the Essential Desk. Now, for all of you to know, politics is a very expensive game. Politicians make a number of promises to backers that they have no intention of keeping. This is a universal truth. But how should a ruler treat his loyal backers after he or she has absorbed the power they were looking for? This is what this chapter seeks to address. The authors begin by using Fidel Castro as an example. Now, Fidel Castro was an iconic revolutionary in Cuba. He also became an expert politician. For example, of the 21 ministers that were appointed by Castro in the year 1959, 12 of them had either resigned or had been ousted by the end of the first year. And as the chapter progresses, the authors highlight 5 rules that leaders should use when thinking of coalitions. So let me give them to you in brief. Rule 1, keep your winning coalition as small as possible, as AX you touched on. This will allow the leader to rely on as few people as possible, and the fewer you depend on, the more powerful you are. Rule 2, keep your nominal electorate as large as possible, as GW touched on. In other words, nobody should be irreplaceable. This puts troublemakers in your coalition on notice that ill behavior will not be tolerated, forcing them to toe the line. Rule 3, control the flow of revenue. Control the money. It is always better for the ruler to determine who eats than to allow supporters to feed themselves. This allows the dictator to keep his supporters happy and connected to him. And rule 4, pay your key supporters just enough to keep them loyal. You heard that, just enough. According to the book, Robert Mugabe was the master of this rule. When unrest would build up in the army, he would pay them handsomely to keep them off his back. The whole idea is to remember that everyone around you wants to be you. For a dictator, the goal is to ensure that all those that are following you are always hungry and never satisfied. Let me quickly go through rule 5. Don't take money out of your supporters' pockets to make their lives better. Now, this chapter shows us that power is a game of misdirection and manipulation. But the end game remains the same in all contexts, and that is keep power.
Amen.
Okay, so on a day when we had no winning headline, please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channels. We are also on your TV screens. Find us on Pang Free to Air, GoTV, and Star Times. And I'll leave you with this quote from the book. It says, "This is the essential lesson of politics. In the end, ruling is the objective, not necessarily ruling well." Thank you so much for watching.
Enjoy your weekend.